Welcome. This is Charter Local Edition. My name is Brad Pomerance. We at Charter Communications are so pleased that we are able to invite the candidates who are running to be judge in the Los Angeles County Superior Court in November. There are 4 contests on the ballot. There were 7 in the primary. 4 are moving to general election. During this half hour, we'll be speaking with the 2 candidates that advanced to the general election. In office number 11, Debra Archuleta and Stephen Schreiner. We'll start our conversation with Mr. Schreiner, then we'll speak with Ms. Archuleta, and then we'll bring the 2 together. Stephen Schreiner, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
We appreciate you being here. You, sir, have been a deputy DA for almost 30 years.
Very clear. It'll be 30 years in April, yeah.
Why have you decided to dedicate your career to be a deputy district attorney?
It was kind of a transition. It was something that when I was in law school, I realized that trial work was something that I was going to enjoy doing, was most comfortable with. I worked on the other side for a while as not as an attorney, but as a law clerk, legal aid for the public defender.
I see.
In Santa Clara County. Did intake interviews in the jails, got to know lots of the defendants up close and personal. And as a result of that exposure, decided I'd probably be more comfortable on the other side.
So let's talk about your years in the DA's office. Over 80 murder trials, over 210, almost 220 felony jury trials.
Yes.
You have seen the worst of the worst.
For many years, yes.
And I want to get a sense, how does that inform you should you become a Superior Court judge?
Well, you know, from my perspective, I think that it sort of lets me differentiate between the predators, the really serious, hardcore people that society needs to be protected from, versus, the vast number out there who are young men, and it's more often than not young men, who've made a mistake and deserve some other chance or opportunity. I talked to some of the people in my office who are senior and said, your biggest problem if you sit on the bench is you've done all these heavy cases for so long,
right,
it's going to be hard for you to deal with the really minor thing. And I said, well, that's one perspective, but I think it enables you to see the difference between them.
At the same time, because you've been a DA your whole career, you've only seen criminal cases.
Absolutely.
Now, while the majority of cases in a Superior Court are criminal, there's a likelihood you could wind up in a civil court.
Absolutely. Yeah.
How will that experience, only in criminal law, play out should you wind up in a civil courtroom?
Well, there's a learning curve, obviously. The advantage of having done what I've done throughout my career, and I'm fairly certain I've done more trials than anyone in our entire office. You get all that experience, you know how to try a case, whether it be a civil or criminal case. And there's a lot of the rules of evidence are going to apply either way. But certainly, and it's a question that we're always asked, those of us who are in the criminal area, if you go to civil, if you do probate, if you do family law, what are you going to do?
Right.
Well, you're going to learn is what you're going to do. Yeah. The reality is, given my experience, I would expect, unless there's a pressing need somewhere else, that's probably the route I would go.
I worked for a judge. I was a lawyer, and after law school, I worked for a judge for a year in a federal district court in Denver, Colorado. And I was always amazed by the majesty of the position, the power of the position in the best sense, the deference that the judge receives. And you've been in front of judges your whole career. A couple of years back, there was an incident where you had used some colorful language out of frustration. And I'm sure you learned from that incident. And I guess what I would ask is, if you become judge and you have an attorney act in a way that may not be appropriate, however you want to use that term, how will your incident in 2014 inform you when you look down to the galley?
Good question. Without getting into great detail, that was a trial that took 6 weeks to try, ended up a jury that was hanging. We were given an opportunity to re-argue for 10 minutes a 6-week trial.
Right.
And frustration is one way of looking at it. I was trying to ramp it up in terms of emotional intensity to get to the jurors, say, hey, this, you have the facts. you have reason to get to a verdict. So the irony is that situation, which was made a big issue 2 years later, or 2 years ago, rather. At the time, there were 4 or 5 defense attorneys, not an objection made, nor anything from the court as well. And motions, all that, nothing addressed it, but it was made an issue of in the campaign 2 years ago. But I understand the frustration, though, that people can.
But it does beg the question, even though at the moment it wasn't a big deal, and I'm not making too much of it, I don't mean to. Judges do have an immense amount of power. And I want to get a sense, how do you see yourself exercising that power in a way that is fair, judicious, appropriate? Because look, we've all seen judges, you more than I, who act in ways that are probably above and beyond.
Sure. And I've had, obviously I'm not going to name any names here.
All good.
I've had experiences with some judges that were just abusive, frankly. And I've suffered through that, and I know the difference. I know the difference between an attorney who is an advocate, advocating forcefully, even above and beyond, versus a judge abusing one of the parties or participants. My demeanor is typically very low key.
Seems that way.
When I argue a case, that's generally what it is too. I mean, it depends on the case. Sometimes there's a much more emotional intensity. Sometimes you're responding to a defense argument and rebuttal where you want to show this is outrageous, and you'll ramp it up. I'm more than capable of doing that. But when you're a judge, you have to be the neutral arbiter. And I recognize that. And I recognize that if I'm elected and I become a judge, I'm no longer going to be an advocate.
Right.
And I accept that role.
But let me ask you, given your success as a deputy district attorney, why do you want to become a judge? You've had a great career. You're now in the special trials division, which suggests that your superiors think highly of you. You've exceeded expectations in your reviews in the last year.
Well, that's a good question. I was actually approached by one of the sitting judges 15 years ago.
Oh my!
When I was trying a lot of heavy cases, and at that point, he said, I could probably put your papers in and get you appointed under whoever the governor was at the time. My reaction at the time was, who would want to be a judge?
Interesting.
I'm a trial lawyer. I'm in it. I'm arguing for a side.
So what happened 15 years later?
I got older. I've done a lot. I don't know anyone else who's tried 200 cases in their career. I don't know anyone else who's tried 80 murders, capital cases, all that. You go from the standpoint, I know you know this, when you start out, you first walk into court, the judge is a godlike figure. He knows everything. And after a while, you tend to realize, well, they're human beings, and they're flawed. And some of them are good, and some aren't as good. And after a while, we all go back to the office and complain about this judge or that judge and the rulings they make, and they don't understand this or that. And after a while, you come to the conclusion, I could do this, and I could probably do it better than a lot of them do. When you're in the meat of your career, and I've loved trying cases, in our office, we're supposed to be an office of trial lawyers. Well, you'll find there's a pattern. They tend to try them in their 30s, maybe till around 40 or so, but in their mid to late 50s, they're done.
You're not.
I'm not done. I'm still doing it. So but I can see making the transition.
We're going to continue our conversation when we come back. We're going to be speaking with the other candidate in the race. Her name is Debra Archuleta. After we speak with Ms. Archuleta, we'll come back and have Mr. Schreiner join us again for a conversation between the two remaining candidates for office number 11 in the Los Angeles County Superior Court. My name is Brad Pomerance. We'll be right back on Charter Local Edition. Welcome back to Charter Local Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. We are continuing our conversation with candidates for judge on the Los Angeles County Superior Court. We are speaking with the two candidates who have advanced to the general in office number 11. We are now speaking with Debra Archuleta. She had tremendous success in the primary, garnering over 47% of the vote. You needed 50% to win outright. When I looked at the vote totals for the other three races where candidates are advancing, I didn't see a candidate that close to 50%. And I want to get a sense from you, Ms. Archuleta, why is it you believe that of the races that are going to general, that you came so close?
Well, not quite close enough.
Right, but I think it's fair because look, you had four other candidates just
Yes.
like the other offices, and everyone was, the top two were in the 30s generally. You were at
Correct.
47.
Well, and I had two very worthy colleagues, opponents, prosecutors, and then Mr. Malik, a civil litigator. I think the reason that I did so well, and it was very surprising and humbling and gratifying all at the same time to me, was that I had been working tremendously hard for the last year and a half, going all over the county. I would go to breakfast on the weekends. I was going to many Democratic club meetings. I would go to Republican club meetings. I was spending a lot of time in South LA, going to meetings there, listening to the concerns of the community. And I was very much involved with local community activities and getting my message out there. And apparently my message resonated with the voters, hence the very successful outcome for the primary. But as you indicated, not quite enough.
Not quite. But I do want to ask, given that you have been speaking
Yes.
so frequently to the community, if you're running for mayor, you're running for assembly, you can present your position.
Right.
When you're running for judge, you can't.
That's correct.
It's not appropriate. And so, as a matter of philosophy, as a matter of approach, how do you do it? How do you run for judge and speak to the Republican club of the Conejo or the Antelope Valley?
Well, I will tell you, my personal story is apparently interesting. My message of my background, my experience.
Give us your personal story. You've been a DA for 26 years.
Yes, I have.
Deputy DA, that's your full-time job for the entire legal career you've had?
Yes.
So give us a sense of your background.
Well, I have had a wonderful career in the district attorney's office for 26 years. I was hired by Ira Reiner.
Sure.
I worked under Mr. Reiner, Mr. Garcetti, Mr. Cooley, and now Ms. Lacey. It's been a tremendously satisfying career because I've gotten to work on behalf of victims for 26 years. But what's most interesting to me is despite my success as a prosecutor, I have had tremendous support and respect from the defense bar, which I think bodes well for me, not only as a person, a prosecutor, but as a judge as well. And my story basically is I worked through college and law school. I started off as a legal secretary, working my way through community college. I went to UC Irvine. I worked full-time at night and on the weekends and went to law school as well. I joined the district attorney's office in 1989 as a law clerk, and I was fortunate enough to get hired as a deputy district attorney in 1991. And during the course of my career, I have spent the majority of my career working to advocate on behalf of victims of violent sexual assault, domestic violence, child molestation.
Essentially, for the last 25 years, let's say,
Correct.
You have been working,
Yes.
Prosecuting cases, domestic violence, child abuse, domestic violence, murder, family, domestic violence. You've seen it all.
Sexual assault, everything from shaken babies to elder abuse. And frankly, I think the reason that my message has resonated is that the crimes that I have prosecuted really tear at the fabric of society. It doesn't make a difference, race, creed, color, religion, ethnic background, socioeconomic status. The crimes that I have prosecuted involve women, children, the gay community, and my message to the voters apparently has resonated because these are the crimes that do break down our society and they start in our families.
Along those lines, of the 8 candidates
Yes.
that have advanced for these 4 offices,
Yes.
7 of you are prosecutors. And no doubt that that brings a certain tableau of skills and a certain sense of the judicial process. But the Superior Court doesn't only handle criminal matters, handle civil matters.
Correct?
And so talk to me about what happens if you wind up in a civil court. You wind up in matrimony.
Well, I can tell you that my first experience getting hired as a law clerk was on a murder case of a child that actually arose out of a dissolution of marriage, and there was a custody dispute. There's a lot of overlap between the family law courts, the probate courts,
I see.
and even the civil courts. And frankly, I was assigned to white-collar crime division for 2 years, and although I had other cases from other divisions with me, I did get a sense of what it was like to deal with high-dollar white-collar fraud and white-collar crime
you
cases.
handled those types of cases for a
Correct.
couple of years.
Yes, I did, and I got to dip my toe in that pool, if you will, and I have that type of experience that I think makes me sort of uniquely and sufficiently qualified if I should get sent to a civil court.
I want to talk about your current position,
Yes.
which as a former lawyer, I personally find fascinating.
Yes.
And that is you are now looking at cases that are brought to the DA's office
Yes.
and deciding whether charges should be filed.
Yes.
Explain that process and how that process may help you should you become a judge.
Well, it's very interesting because I have to scrutinize the work that the police agencies bring in. Since I'm in downtown, I do primarily work with Los Angeles Police Department and the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. The filing detective will bring in paperwork and files to me. I review them. I look at the past criminal history of the suspect. I look to see if the elements of the crime there are met. And then I also have an opportunity, even at this stage, to exercise some discretion. Do I believe that there should be a filing if I believe that the elements are met? Do I believe that this is a case that should receive misdemeanor consideration, felony consideration, or some other type of treatment? So I'm in on the ground floor. And I think that actually what I'm doing now will be very conducive, if I should prevail in November, to what it's like to exercise judicial discretion, because I'm assuming that will be part of the job.
And let's talk about judicial discretion,
Yes.
because for many years, both in California and otherwise, judicial discretion was limited by statute.
Yes.
We are now seeing the pendulum swing to the extent that judges are being given judicial discretion back.
Yes.
How does that make you feel that you now will have probably more power than some of your predecessors had 10, 20 years ago?
Well, it's not the power that concerns me. I don't feel that that's an issue for me. But I think that the way society is progressing now and in the future, that we need more options. I believe that there are times where obviously stiff penalties and punishments are necessary and appropriate. But I think as a society, on some level, we are moving with certain types of crimes to a more rehabilitative system, and we're looking at different forms of punishment and rehabilitation so that the offender gets some appropriate punishment and society also reaps some sort of benefit from rehabbing certain types of criminal defendants.
Right. I mean, there's no question with AB 109, with Proposition 47,
Correct.
we are seeing that shift. I'm not going to ask you your views on those because that would not be
you know
appropriate.
But yes, but I think that this is kind of the way of the future, and that's what's indicated by the legislature with, I think, some of the judicial discretion that they're giving back to the court.
When we come back, we're going to have Mr. Stephen Schreiner join us. He's the other candidate for seat number 11. We're going to continue our conversation that we at Charter Communications are bringing you with the candidates for a judge for the Los Angeles County Superior Court. My name is Brad Pomerance. We'll be right back on Charter Local Edition. Welcome back. It's Charter Local Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. We are speaking with the two candidates that advanced to the general election for a seat on the Los Angeles County Superior Court, office number 11. Debra Archuleta, her ballot designation is Violent Crimes Prosecutor. Stephen Schreiner, his ballot designation is Gang Homicide Prosecutor, which begs the question. Both of you your designations were presented to courts because there were challenges on how you were designating yourself. So you had 3 words to so designate yourself. Why is it, and I'll start with you, Debra, that the designation of violent crimes prosecutor or any designation is so critical in running for a judicial position?
Well, I don't know who decides how critical the ballot designation is, but for me personally, I chose that ballot designation because not only at the time of the election, I know that there are certain time limitations on how you choose your designation, but that encapsulates how I've spent my entire career working in the district attorney's office. So I thought to be as transparent as possible and to give the voters as much information as possible, in addition to my name and the fact that I'm a female, I wanted them to know how I have spent the majority, if not all, of my career and what I was currently spending the majority of my time doing.
Stephen, I want to ask you, your designation was also called into question. Small change made. You had put gang murder prosecutor. It was changed to gang homicide prosecutor. Not as a former lawyer, as someone who tries to be an expert in the English language, I'm not sure why that change was made. But again, talk to us about the designation and how, one word can matter and cause a court to rule one way or the other.
Well, I think the term you mentioned was critical. It is critical because the fact of the matter is, but for forums like this, the public doesn't know much of anything about judicial candidates. So typically what they're looking at is your name and whatever that means in terms of race or ethnicity and gender, and what that means for the vote, and the 3-word ballot designation. So what we're told as candidates by the advisors typically is it's critical, and you want something that's strong and that sounds strong. So we get into what you call yourself and can you justify that. And my understanding was that what you had done for the prior 12 months is what is judged by. Now, as I told you before, I've been doing murder cases throughout my career and have done a lot of them over the years, but in the preceding 12 months prior to the filing period, I'd done 3 sheriff's homicide cases, attempt murder, and then 2 sheriff's homicides, officer-involved shootings. Those justified, all involving gang members as defendants or victims, and that justified it. Why the court decided homicide was a better word than murder, I don't know. I was advised that murder is a better word for me as a candidate because it's more understandable to a certain segment of the public.
I want to talk about something you brought up, Debra, and that's your gender. Debra is a female name. We understand you're a woman. Stephen's a male name. We understand he's a male. And both of you, for better or for worse, in the legal press have seen what it's like to run for office. And Debra, you were subjected to some adjectives that some would argue women who run for office often are forced to face. You, Stephen, were attacked because you used a judge as your model, and she wound up having been disciplined a few times, and that was seen as somehow faulty for you to bring her up. I'll start with you, Debra. Talk to me about this whole process, about running for judge, being attacked in the media, having these words used against you that are often used against strong women.
Well, there is definitely a different standard for female candidates. However, I'm not going to use that as an excuse. I think that's pretty apparent to most people watching even the presidential election. There are all different types of treatment depending on who you are and what you stand for. If I can't take a few hits in the media, which I frankly think that the characterizations were inaccurate and unfair, however, if I can't take that, then how am I going to put on the black robe and mete out justice? I have to be willing to put myself out there, be subjected to criticism, and do with it what I will. But that's not going to deter me, and I think it's only strengthened me, not only as a person, but as a candidate for the position.
Stephen, you've had a career of almost 30 years, and yet the legal press harped on your choice of a judge as your model because this particular judge, Joan Cassini, had been disciplined a few times. What do you make of that? That this one statement somehow got turned into an attack on your character.
Well, I think whatever you say is going to be checked out in one sense or another. In that context, I was asked to cite more than one judge. The judges would be example. and I think Judge Joan Cassani was the one I cited as one who was the greatest legal scholar I've ever seen. And a lot of people who get onto the bench are not truly legal scholars. She was a deputy attorney general for a career and knew case authority better than anyone I've ever known. So whatever the criticisms in terms of those cases, and frankly I wasn't aware of any but one, she still remains the best legal scholar I've ever seen, and I have tremendous respect for her, and I'm not going to change that thought because of whatever other situations there have been.
As you both have said, when you're running for judge, the voters don't know a lot about who you are. Often they will turn to outside organizations for stamps of approval, endorsements. You have endorsements from several district attorneys, past and present, the Los Angeles County Bar Association. Both of you received some version of a qualified recommendation. What do you make of these questions about outside organizations giving you recommendations, and how much weight should be put on them? Deborah.
Well, for me personally, my endorsements are significant in the fact that they cover a broad spectrum of the electorate. I have law enforcement endorsements. I have the endorsement of Jackie Lacey, the current district attorney. I also have significant political endorsements, bipartisan endorsements, and I have tremendous endorsements in the African American community as well. So I have a broad range of endorsements, which for me personally, I take great satisfaction in those endorsements, and I frankly think that helped to explain how well I did in the primary, because I was able to pull votes from a variety of communities.
But let me ask, I mean, there's been tremendous controversy this cycle about the qualification ratings of the Los Angeles County Bar Association. One candidate who advanced got a not qualified. You had a sense that your rating wasn't as high as it should have been. Is this just background noise, or should the voters really care what the Los Angeles County Bar Association says?
Well, the voters can decide how important that particular endorsement is.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very satisfied with my LA County Bar endorsement. Should it be given any more weight or any less weight than any other endorsement? I'm not going to tell the voters how to decide. I think that's for them to look at my website, my campaign materials. I have been all over this county. I have distributed literature far and wide. People can see who else has endorsed me in addition to the LA County Bar recommendation and decide.
Stephen?
I think there's a difference between being a good candidate, that is someone who hustles out and does the different things candidates do, and being a good prospect for the job. When you talk about endorsement, it's largely a function of, did you get out there over weeks and months and hustle to all the different people and ask for those? There's only 3 that involved actually vetting people side by side. Those are the Metropolitan News, the LA Times, and the LA County Bar Judicial Elections Evaluation Committee. So basically what they do is that the Met News and the LA Times talk to all the candidates, investigate their background, and they will recommend one or another in the race. And the county bar, they've in the past,
right,
as you know, everyone's not qualified, everyone's qualified, or everyone's well qualified. In this case, I got well qualified from the county bar, and I was the only one in the race to get it. And both the LA Times and the Met News endorsed me ultimately.
Okay, I want to thank you both for joining us. They are candidates for the Los Angeles County Superior Court, office number 11. We thank Los Angeles County Superior Court Commissioner Alan Friedenthal for helping us set up these forms. My name is Brad Pomerance. It's Charter Local Edition.